Now, the question of how South Africans cast their votes has once again taken center stage. That's despite ongoing debate around the lack of efficiency and accessibility of our current paper-based system. That's the Electoral Commission of South Africa confirming that electoral voting, or electronic voting, should I say, will not be introduced for the 2026 local government elections.
And it comes amid growing concerns about what we've seen before, low voter turnout, lengthy ballot papers, and also some of the logistical challenges during elections that we have reported on. So let's excavate the reasons behind this decision and explore what the future does hold for e-voting in South Africa. And we welcome the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, Sai Mamabolo. Sai, good morning. Thank you very much for your time and for making this early start with us. Let's start with the big announcement. Why has the IEC decided not to implement e-voting for the 2026 local government elections? We've seen earlier discussions. You know, the public has its own expectations as well.
Look, there is no yet policy on e-voting. In fact, there's a discussion document which is intended to get a national conversation going so that we can reach a point where we have national policy. It was never intended that the matter would have developed to a point where it can be implemented for 2026 municipal or 2027 municipal elections. So there's an ongoing discussion. It's an important discussion which must involve all South Africans. We are not at the point where policy has evolved sufficiently and morphed into legislation. So there's not even a legislative framework for that.
All right, it sounds like we're miles away from even having a credible discussion then on e-voting, Sai. But what we've seen, and you've seen this firsthand, is significant voter decline, especially in recent years. We've got millions of registered South Africans who are staying away from the polls. Do you believe that this paper-based system is partly to blame? Would it be one of the issues that e-voting could address?
Well, there are many factors that influence our declining voter turnout. Certainly, electoral efficiency is one of them, but there are others. There are other factors in the political environment which are also at play in influencing our outcomes. Look, in my mind, I don't think there's doubt that at some future point, electronic voting will be implemented. But that point, we need to arrive at that point together as a nation where there are no doubts about the integrity of the process, the integrity of those in the institution who are responsible for driving the process. There is no point in implementing electronic voting in conditions of great doubts about the integrity of our framework and so on. Introducing e-voting in those circumstances will only serve to make matters deteriorate. So we have to go into this national conversation around e-voting, discuss the discussion document, see which of the e-voting configurations will better suit our prevailing circumstances.
Sai, good morning to you then. Has the conversation around funding been had regarding this? And I just ask with regards to the machinery itself, buying that, investing in that, who is in charge of that? Would it be the IEC? Would it be government, etc.? Has that discussion happened at present?
The discussion has unfolded to a point where we're saying the choice of the type. So in other words, the choice of the type will influence the costing. So part of the ongoing discussion is for the IEC to investigate what cost would be for the various modalities of e-voting. And once that is done, when we morph the discussion document into a green paper, there'll be indicative figures of how much each of the options may cost the country. It will then be for National Treasury to find a funding formula for that. Is it going to, are these machines going to be bought in one financial year? Is it going to be over several financial years? Are we going to go for an instrument in the capital market to finance this or not? All those are matters that Treasury will have to reflect on and take appropriate decisions. So the funder of the process will always be National Treasury.
Okay, very interesting. The risk of cybercrime here is quite massive. Susceptibility to corruption being a key part of that in the conversation. How will you be able to balance the need for transparency, for accuracy in this regard, with entrusting security to a system like that, particularly in the first few tries?
Look, Arabile, as I indicate, there are different types. And to minimize the impact that cyber crimes may have in influencing the outcomes, it might be prudent that as a country, we go for a hybrid system where the majority of voters still go to the voting station, use a voting machine with a voter verifiable audit trail, so that there's also a paper backup that if there's a dispute, we can go back to that audit trail and count to confirm what the machine says. I think that would be important as a confidence building measure to be integrated into the process to ensure that each machine that is deployed in a voting station, there's a voter verifiable paper audit trail. And then you could, for certain sections of the voting public, such as those that are outside of the country, allow a bit of internet voting for those. So you could even go for hybrid systems like those for the different categories of voters. So that's really our view on the matter. Because if you implement a voting station-based solution, then you are not always online and therefore not susceptible to cyber crimes that are so prevalent in today's world.
Yeah, I think it's quite a sobering take aside, just looking at where we are practically in South Africa now. The levels of comfort that people have in voting the way that they traditionally always have. And wanting to minimize any threat to the credibility of an election result. And we've seen this being a contentious point even in our last election. So let's look ahead. If not in 2026, when would this likely happen? I mean, we've still got to move with the times. Yes, we have very specific challenges in South Africa. But how do we work our way to a point where we are? And I know you mentioned the hybrid system as well, which would allow us that form of testing. But when do you think we could realistically get there? And is that a place we really want to get to where it's exclusively electronic?
Look, in yesterday's discussion in the KwaZulu-Natal legislature, there was a dominant view, if one could call it, that says, let's approach this with great caution. Let's not rush into it, because this has a potential to destroy our own nascent democracy if we rush into it and make mistakes. So we of course, we have to heed that advice. Yet at the same time, there has to be an element of resolve to move the country forward in terms of innovation and modernizing, so that we make the voting process more efficient, because we're not intending to introduce electronic voting purely because it's a buzzword. It has to be introduced to make the system more efficient. It has to be introduced to make the system more transparent and increase the integrity, overall integrity of the electoral process. I can't give you a date, Imam, at this stage. I can't give a date and say certainly 2029 or the elections thereafter. But all I can affirm is that at some future date, would have no choice but to implement some kind of electronic voting.
Sufficient political will, Sai? Is there enough of that for this to happen?
Not at the moment. Certainly, if yesterday's discussions are anything to go by. So there's a lot of work that we need to be doing in discussions with political parties, in the provinces, in the legislatures, as well as in national parliament. There is almost a deep-seated wariness within the political terrain about the necessity for e-voting. So discussions at that level are required more than has been the case with the rest of the population. So our work is cut out, therefore, to ensure that we engage much more intensely with politicians and disabuse them of certain of the risks that they think are involved in e-voting.
I just wanted to ask about another issue, Sai, if I may. It's really the IEC's response to the MK party member entering a school in Msinga in KZN in full party regalia, handing out MK party certificates and the like. Is there a kind of response that could come from the IEC with regards to that, and maybe any consequence management as well?
Oh, certainly. First of all, behavior such as that, it's inimical to it's inimical to a conduct that we require for a decent electoral process. So we do not want have it repeated. When we get the full details in a report, we'll be able to make an assessment whether this is worthy to pursue by way of applications in the electoral court for appropriate sanctions. So we'll have to look at what evidential material we have to back up a successful sanction that may come from the end of the electoral court.
Mamabolo, thank you very much. I know you've got a busy workday ahead of you. Thanks for joining us and stopping by this morning. He is the IEC's Chief Electoral Officer, talking about very important innovation around e-voting. And it's so interesting to see all of the complexities related to that and some of the doubts, as he said, that politicians currently have about the integrity of the count.